The Cataclysm didn't just change the world, it ended the one that came before it. Abyssal rifts tore open across every continent simultaneously, the sky cracking apart like glass as the system integration forcibly merged with reality. Monsters flooded out of the eternal abyss in numbers that defied comprehension, and humanity learned the hardest possible lesson in the shortest possible time. Awaken your talent, change your job, grow stronger, or be consumed. Entire cities vanished overnight. Nations that had stood for centuries dissolved in weeks. The old world, with all its comfort and certainty, was gone, and what replaced it was something far more brutal and far more alive. 300 years of dungeons, abyssal spawn, and the relentless climb toward power later. A being that calls itself God emerges from the depths of the eternal abyss and declares the extinction of mankind as though it were already decided. It has clearly never met Nova Stern. On the day of his awakening, Nova receives a talent that earns little more than a passing glance from the examiners. Unlimited amplification, unranked, undescribed, unremarkable on paper. What nobody understands yet is that there is no upper limit to what it can touch, and no version of strength it cannot multiply into something terrifying. Comprehension amplified 100,000x SSS rank talent. Absolute insight acquired. Basic breathing method analyzed. Primordial breathing method forged. Cultivation speed. X1,000. Physical body amplified 10,000x Immortal physique achieved. Nuclear resistant. Origin talent amplified 1,000,000x apex origin. Eternal flame awakened. Abyssal lords, ancient monsters, and a self-proclaimed god with the nerve to threaten the entire human race. They are all about to learn what it means to stand in the path of something that has no ceiling, no limit, and no intention of stopping. A god walked out of the abyss and announced the end of the world. Nova just wants to know one thing. Do you dare take the flick of his finger? Chapter 1. The day everything changes. 299. 300. 301. 302. The count came out as barely a breath, steady and flat. Morning light pushed through the windowsill in thin strips, falling across the floorboards and climbing the wall as the sun rose higher. The room was small. A bed against one wall, a study desk buried under training manuals and textbooks, a cracked mirror above a basin in the corner. Nova Stern's upper body was bare, skin damp, doing one-handed push-ups with the kind of form that came from repetition rather than thought. Back flat, each rep controlled. He'd been at it for over an hour. He stopped when the knock came. Nova, I've gone to work. Remember to eat the breakfast on the table. Got it, Aunt Mira. He waited until her footsteps faded and the front door clicked shut, then pressed both palms down, engaged his core, and flipped to his feet. One long exhale. He rolled his neck until it cracked. Nix. How long have I been exercising? The watch display rippled. A sleek black cat materialized on screen, standing on its hind legs, tail curling. Master got up early today and exercised for 1 hour and 7 minutes. Excellent work, Naya. Nova nodded. Basic martial arts forms. 10 cycles. 100 sit-ups. 100 squats. 300 push-ups each hand. Just over an hour. His baseline was still creeping forward, which was the only thing that mattered. Open the panel. Status, character. Nova Stern. Race. Human. Age. 17. Level. Unawakened. Profession. None. Talent. None. Physical strength. 14. Strength. 12 plus 1. Speed. 11. Spirit. 15. Luck. 10. Intense. None. Laws. None. Passive special essence. None. Active skills. None. Practice method. Basic martial arts. Basic breathing method. Basic bodybuilding method. Equipment. None. Free attribute points. 0. Evaluation. Weaker than an abyssal ant. Still. Pathetic. Nova muttered, and headed for the shower. 3 minutes under cold water. He stood at the basin afterward, wiping his face, and caught his reflection staring back at him. Sharp features, dark eyes, the kind of face that had earned him an embarrassing nickname at the academy. Something about a heartbreaker. He'd never asked for it and couldn't get rid of it. He looked at himself for a moment and thought, not for the first time, about the life before this one. He'd been a high school student. Completely ordinary, average grades, no special talents, no remarkable story. Then, shortly after his 15th birthday, something went wrong with his body. A slow, quiet deterioration that no doctor could explain. They ran every test available and came back with nothing. No disease. No structural abnormality. No cause. Just a boy getting weaker by the month, and medicine standing at the edge of that fact with empty hands. He died before he turned 17. The strange part had never been the death itself. The strange part was the dreams he'd carried his entire life. Long before any illness. Long before any of it. He'd dreamed of moving through the void of space, of watching civilizations from above as they rose and collapsed over millennia. Of clashing with enemies across dimensions he had no words for. Of crushing through the walls between realms like they were paper. Wild, vivid, utterly inexplicable dreams that felt less like imagination and more like memory. He chalked it up to an overactive mind. A kid who read too much. Then he transmigrated. Watched a man split a boulder with a flick of his wrist. Saw a Tier 2 warrior tear apart an abyssal spawn that weighed 50 tons. Stood in front of an awakening array and felt the faint hum of primordial energy moving through the air like something breathing. The dreams stopped feeling like fiction after that. He had no proof. Nothing concrete. Just a persistent, bone-deep suspicion that his soul was older than one lifetime, and that whatever he'd been before this, before the sick kid in a hospital bed, before Nova Stern doing push-ups in a small room in Thornhaven City, it wasn't ordinary. He intended to find out. But strength came first. Everything else came after. He got dressed, ate Aunt Myra's breakfast fast, and left. The skyrail was packed. Nova squeezed through the doors a breath before they sealed and found an empty seat near the window, which felt like the universe offering a small, grudging apology for everything else. The car hummed and lifted. Below, the suburban district fell away. Houses shrinking to the size of scattered toys as the rail climbed to its cruising height of nearly 100 meters. Ahead, the city proper rose in a dense wall of towers, steel and glass stretching hundreds of meters into the sky. Aircraft moved through the upper airspace in organized streams, their exhaust trails catching the morning light. At the city's center stood the clock tower, cloud-piercing, its peak lost to haze. And at the far edge, barely visible on a clear day like today, the defensive wall stretched across the horizon. A steel barrier hundreds of meters tall, standing between the city and whatever lived outside it. Nova always looked at the wall. He wasn't sure why. Force of habit, maybe. Welcome to Skyrail Line 51. Good morning, passengers of Thornhaven City. Today is another peaceful day. Last night, a small-scale spawn tide erupted from the A-rank Abyssal Rift in Sector 13, suppressed within half an hour by City Garrison Commander Drakenves. A Tier 6 Abyssal spawn was eliminated. Around him, most passengers didn't react. Spawn tides from the outer rifts were regular enough that a half-hour suppression barely registered as news. Headmaster Gareth Ironvale of Thornhaven 1st Combat Academy has broken through to Tier 7, and is expected to run for the next City Lord position. A few people stirred at that one. Tier 7 was a different category of existence entirely. Anomalous phenomena in the Silver Peak Ocean are suspected to involve a king-class abyssal spawn. The Sokoran Empire has sent an envoy to the Valdris Federation to discuss countermeasures. Nova let the broadcast fade to background noise. As a transmigrator, 17 years had passed since he arrived in this world. He couldn't say with certainty whether he had crossed into an entirely separate world or a divergent future of his original planet. The history texts muddied that question rather than answering it. Up until the year 2024 AD, 300 years ago, every recorded historical event matched what he knew. The same nations, the same technological progression, the same civilizational arc. 300 years ago, year 1 of the Cataclysm era, back when the calendar still read 2025, the eternal abyss had descended without warning. Abyssal rifts tore open across the globe. Monsters poured through by the millions, and humanity lost half its population before anyone understood what was happening. What saved the other half was the system integration, the planet itself awakening in response to the invasion, using its own laws to convert the energy of slain monsters into resources, routing experience back to the people who did the killing, handing every human a digitized interface and the means to grow stronger. The world expanded. Dungeons appeared. A martial order emerged from the wreckage, and 2 centuries of grinding, dying, and adapting later, humanity was still here. Year 297 now. The outer rifts were training grounds. The strongest humans touched the demigod tier, and 17-year-olds rode the skyrail to their awakening ceremonies while debating streamers. I'm telling you, those figures are absolutely lethal. Is it really that good? Obviously. Didn't you notice my blood and chi vitality dropped? The 2 students ahead of him were fully committed to the conversation. Nova had no interest. His mind was already on the ceremony. Today, every graduating student would go through 2 awakenings. The first, Origin Talent Awakening, was the one that kept people up at night. A designated array would resonate with your soul and draw out whatever law existed within it, etching it permanently. The talent was yours from that moment. Unique to you the way a soul was unique. And with it came an instinctive surface understanding of the law it was tied to. The ceiling question came after. Upgrading a talent meant comprehending the law beneath it at a deeper level, and that was something no amount of grinding or money could shortcut. It required sitting with the law, studying it until a new layer cracked open. Most warriors never managed it once across their entire lives. So if you awakened weak talent, the odds were long. The second awakening, the job ceremony, worked differently. The planet conducted it through the system directly, running each candidate through a trial before etching a class law into the soul. An additional grant from a world that had decided its best investment was the people protecting it. Origin talent for your ceiling, job for your role. And between those 2 things, a person's entire future could pivot in a single morning. Nova watched the city slide past the glass. He had no powerful background, no hidden patron, no cheat inherited from another life, at least not one he could access yet. What he had was 17 years of careful preparation. A body he'd built rep by rep, a suspicion about his own soul that he couldn't prove, and the kind of stubbornness that didn't have an off switch. It would have to be enough. Thornhaven Combat Academy, now arriving. Nova stood, straightened his uniform, and moved with the crowd toward the doors. The academy gates rose ahead. Banners in deep navy and silver hung on either side. Students poured in from every direction. Some loud and restless, some quiet, all of them heading to the same place. He walked through without slowing. Chapter 2. Origin Awakening Ceremony. After stepping off the skyrail, Nova followed the morning crowd down the terminal's main elevator and onto the street. 10 minutes of walking through the bustle of the Eastern District brought him to the gates of Thornhaven First Combat Academy, a campus that swallowed nearly 1,000 acres of prime city real estate and still somehow felt like it needed more space. He'd walked through these gates hundreds of times. Today felt different. The senior year classroom was already buzzing when Nova arrived. Students in academy uniforms clustered in groups, everyone's nerves bleeding into their conversations. My stomach's doing backflips, a girl with auburn braids told her friends, wringing her hands. You and me both. Stay positive. I bet at least one of us awakens a mage class talent. Honestly, I'd settle for healer. Stable income, always in demand. Across the room, the boys were handling their nerves differently. So Kessler, feeling confident? A lanky boy grinned at his friend. Kessler. Perpetually greasy hair, permanently unearned self-assurance. Wiped his nose and nodded. Obviously, S-rank talent. Just watch. The laughter that followed was immediate and merciless. S-rank. I'll legally change my name to Kessler's dog if that happens. You'd be lucky to scrape E-rank with those stats. Kessler's face went crimson and the argument started. Nova was still watching the chaos when a hand landed on his shoulder. So, feeling good about the awakening, Cade Fenrir, amber eyes bright, grinning like today was a holiday, fell into step beside him. His best friend since their first year, Cade had the rare ability to be genuinely cheerful without it being annoying. Most of the time. Not particularly, Nova said. Liar. You've got that face. What face? The confident one. The one that makes people think you know something they don't. Nova didn't respond to that. They reached his usual seat and found it occupied. Seraphine Vex had claimed his desk as a napping spot, her dark hair in twin buns, her expression completely peaceful. She was one of the top 3 students in their entire class. Her combat assessment scores were the kind that made instructors go quiet when they read them aloud, and right now she was sleeping like she hadn't a care in the world. Nova stared at her for a moment, then took her empty seat nearby without a word. Cade immediately dragged a chair over, leaning in with the energy of someone who had been saving this conversation. I'm telling you, she likes you. She's sleeping at my desk. Exactly my point. Out of every desk in this room, she chose yours. That's not an accident, that's a statement. It's a desk, Cade. And if your awakening goes badly today, which it won't, but hypothetically, you should seriously consider becoming a trophy husband. Sarah's family is loaded. You'd never have to train again. Nova opened his mouth to respond when a shout from the windows cut through every conversation in the room at once. The teleportation array? It's on the field. The class surged toward the glass like a single organism. Nova stood and looked. On the training field below, large enough to hold tens of thousands of people, an enormous formation had materialized overnight. Intricate geometric patterns covered the ground in lines of softly pulsing light, shifting through colors that had no clean name. Even from this height, it hummed with something that wasn't quite sound. That's the Primordial Awakening Array, someone said, pressed against the glass. Stand on it and it transports you to the Origin Temple for the ceremonies. I heard it reads your potential first. Strong aptitudes get sent into trial dungeons before the awakening. Score high enough and you get bonus rewards. And if you fail the trial, a beat of silence. Job awakening denied. You stay civilian class. The air in the room got heavier. Instructor Celine Mordain arrived minutes later and herded everyone toward the athletic grounds with the efficient energy of someone who had done this many times and had no patience for dawdling. The senior classes assembled in designated sections across the field. A sea of nervous faces in navy and silver uniforms. What profession are you hoping for? Someone asked as they filed into formation. Assassin. Moving like a shadow, stealth kills, nothing cooler. I take any support class. Fight meaningfully without standing in front of the monsters. Warrior. Classic. Archers in high demand right now. Range and job security. Nova listened without contributing. His eyes moved across the field, measuring the crowd, counting the instructors positioned around the array's perimeter. Tier 3 to Tier 4 by the look of them, capable and experienced, placed there to handle anything the ceremonies might throw up. Then Cade's elbow caught him in the ribs. Elite class. Nova looked. They entered from the eastern corridor with a bearing that was difficult to articulate but impossible to miss. Where ordinary students moved in nervous clusters, the elite class walked like they already knew how the day would end. The crowd parted without being asked, a reflex more than a choice. 5 in particular drew every eye, 3 young men and 2 young women who seemed to compress the air around them just by being present. Aldrich Wintercrown, someone murmured nearby. Top of elite class. His family's produced Tier 7 warriors for 3 generations. He's already on the verge of Tier 1 before his job awakening. Cassius Shadowbane. Rowan Ashford. His father runs the Ashford conglomerate. And the twin goddesses. Nova's gaze settled on the 2 young women at the edge of the group. The first, Lyrissa Shenvale, had violet hair and matching eyes that seemed to collect light rather than simply reflect it. She was scanning the assembled crowd with a small, playful smile, like she found the whole thing mildly entertaining. Tall, effortlessly composed, the kind of presence that made a room recalibrate. The second, Caleth Frostborn, was her opposite in almost every way. Raven hair that fell to her thighs, piercing blue eyes, features so symmetrical they looked designed. She wasn't scanning the crowd. She was looking through it, her expression fixed in something between boredom and disdain. a glacier that had learned to walk. Those two standing together should be illegal, Cade muttered. Before he could continue, the atmosphere on the field changed. It didn't happen with a sound or a visible sign. One moment students were talking, shuffling, adjusting their uniforms. The next, every voice died at exactly the same instant, cut off as cleanly as a blade through rope. Above the center of the field, space itself split open. Not a dramatic tear or an explosion of light. Just a quiet, clean rupture in the air. A seam appearing in reality, and through it stepped two figures. The headmaster, Gareth Ironvale, and behind him the vice principal, a silver-haired man whose Tier 6 presence alone would have commanded the field on any other day. Today, standing next to Gareth, he was background. The pressure arrived a half-second after they landed. It wasn't wind. It wasn't sound. It was weight. A profound, sourceless gravity that pressed down on every person present from every direction simultaneously. Nova felt it hit his shoulders first, then his knees, then something deeper, like the pressure was bypassing his body and pushing directly on whatever was underneath it. His legs bent without his permission. Around him, ordinary students crumpled. Some dropping to one knee, others to both. A few letting out involuntary sounds of distress, their faces pale and strained. A girl 2 rows ahead had both hands on the ground, trembling. The elite class students fared better. Aldrich Wintercrown stood with visible effort, jaw locked, shoulders rigid. Lyris had lost her playful smile. Even Kalitha's expression had shifted slightly, the disdain replaced by something more focused, her feet planted wide, her composure costing her something real. Nova bent. One knee nearly touched the ground before he caught himself. He pushed back. It was like pushing against something that had no surface. The pressure was everywhere and nowhere, with nothing to brace against. His muscles screamed. His vision blurred at the edges. And then, from somewhere he couldn't locate, somewhere that felt older than his body, older than this life, something stirred. It didn't push back against the pressure. It simply existed alongside it, quiet and unmoved, like a stone at the bottom of a river that the current had never managed to shift. Nova didn't know what it was. He'd felt echoes of it in his dreams, in the fragments of void and crushed dimensions and endless traveling that had followed him since childhood. It lasted only a second before it faded back to wherever it came from. But it was enough. He straightened. Not fully. His legs still shook. But he was upright. The instructors and teachers stationed around the field stood completely unaffected. Tier 3 through Tier 6. Every one of them absorbing the pressure the way a wall absorbs a breeze. A few had their arms folded. One was reviewing notes. Gareth hadn't moved. Hadn't adjusted his posture. Hadn't so much as glanced at the students kneeling across the field. The pressure radiating from him was passive, the ambient consequence of existing at his level, not a deliberate act. That was less than 1% of his aura. Nova understood that in his bones. A Tier 7 warrior could level a continent in a single attack. With time and intent, reduce a cluster of continents to rubble. The man standing on that platform was a force of nature wearing a headmaster's uniform, and he wasn't even trying. Gareth let the moment breathe. Then the pressure eased, not vanishing, but pulling back to something that merely made the air feel thick rather than crushing. Students straightened slowly, some wiping sweat from their faces, a few exchanging wide-eyed looks. When Gareth spoke, he needed no amplification. You have spent 3 years within these walls. His voice carried across the entire field without effort, each word landing with a weight that had nothing to do with volume. 3 years learning what this world is. 3 years preparing for today. Complete silence. Your origin talent awakening and job awakening ceremonies begin now. Today your futures take shape. He paused. A powerful talent gives you an advantage. That is true, and I won't pretend otherwise. But a common talent or a basic profession has never stopped a determined warrior from becoming someone worth remembering. History has proved that more times than I can count. Whatever manifests in you today, accept it. Then decide what you're going to do about it. His hand rose. Activate the Primordial Awakening Array. The formation detonated. Light shot upward in a pillar that punched through the sky, so bright it bleached the surrounding buildings white for a full second. The geometric patterns across the field blazed in sequence, each line igniting the next in a cascade that moved faster than the eye could follow. The hum that had been barely audible before became something felt in the chest, in the teeth. Then it was over. The field was empty. Every student was gone. The vice principal stroked his silver beard. I wonder how many rare professions and talent will manifest this year. The elite class prodigies have strong odds. The Dean of Academic Affairs offered. Gareth shook his head slightly. We'll see. Nova opened his eyes to silence. The Origin Temple. He stood alone in a chamber that made no architectural sense. Pillars of what looked like compressed starlight rose on either side of him, disappearing into a ceiling he couldn't find. Statues of figures he didn't recognize lined the approach ahead, their stone faces simultaneously serene and violent, as though carved in the moment between deciding something and doing it. The floor was smooth and dark and reflected the light from everywhere at once. At the far end, floating above a platform with no visible support, hung a crystal roughly the size of a small house. Inside it, galaxies moved. Nova looked at it for a long moment. Then he walked forward. So this is where it happens. He climbed the steps to the platform, reached out, and pressed his fingers against the crystal surface. It blazed instantly. Welcome, human of planet Etheris, to the Origin Temple. Initiating Origin Talent Selection Protocol. Warmth spread through his chest and down his arm. Something gathered in his palm. A small flicker of flame. Weak, orange, barely the size of a candle. Ding! Congratulations on manifesting. E-rank Origin Talent, Emberwood Flame. Nova stared at the flame in his palm. The ranking went F, E, D, C, B, A, S, 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 S. He was one step above the bottom. E-rank, he said quietly. The word sat in the air. He'd prepared himself for this possibility. Told himself it wouldn't break him. That he'd train harder, comprehend deeper, find another way. He still felt it land. Then the crystal exploded. Not with heat or force, with light. A detonation of color so complete it stopped being something he was seeing and became something he was standing inside. Colors that had no names washed over him in waves, and the temperature in the chamber changed entirely. And somewhere deep in his chest, the small orange flame flickered once before something vast and ancient and entirely different swallowed it whole. Ding! Congratulations on manifesting. Primordial Origin Exclusive Talent. Unlimited Amplification. Chapter 3. Nightmare Trial. Birth of a God. Nova stared at the cascading rainbow text floating before his eyes and said nothing for a long moment. Then he said, "What tier is this even supposed to be? Does my soul truly possess such a talent? Is the talent manifestation glitching? Did I accidentally break reality?" So many questions unanswered. He paused. I knew my soul wasn't ordinary. His hands weren't entirely steady as he mentally selected the notification to read the full details. Unlimited Amplification. Primordial Origin. Effect. Upon activation, randomly amplifies one of the following: Comprehension, physical body, origin talent, skills, or equipment. Amplification magnitude is randomized with a minimum multiplier of 100,000x. No upper limit exists. All effects are permanent. Amplified abilities possess a probability of evolving to higher tiers. Usage. Grants 1 amplification opportunity per life level advancement. Currently available. 1 use evaluation. Unlimited amplification enables unlimited evolution, the power to transcend divinity itself. Nova read it twice, then a third time, a minimum multiplier of 100,000 times. No ceiling. Permanent effects. 1 use per life level advancement, meaning the further he climbed, the more opportunities accumulated. He pinched his own cheek hard enough to leave a mark. Still here. Still real. This is, he said quietly to the empty temple, completely broken. Before he could think further, the crystal pulsed again. Soul talent etching will now begin. Preparing to etch origin talent. Emberwood flame. The air in the chamber shifted. Something that wasn't light and wasn't heat gathered around him. A presence without weight, a pressure without force. Then the runes appeared. They floated before him in a slow, rotating formation, ancient geometric patterns that pulsed with a faint orange warmth. Nova looked at them and felt something strange move through his chest. Not fear. Something closer to recognition, though he had no memory to attach it to. Looking at those runes was like looking at something fundamental. Not the flame itself, but the rule behind it, the principle that said fire exists, fire transforms, fire consumes and renews. The building blocks of the universe arranged into a language older than any civilization he'd ever read about. Then they moved toward him and sank in. The etching was brief. A warmth in his chest that bloomed and faded in seconds, leaving behind a faint ember glow somewhere beneath his sternum. Simple. Clean. Emberwood flame successfully etched. Preparing to etch origin talent. Unlimited amplification. The chamber changed. Every surface brightened simultaneously. The galaxies inside the crystal above him accelerated. Stars wheeling, colliding, being born and dying in seconds. The rotating runes that appeared this time were nothing like the Emberwood flame's simple geometric warmth. These were vast, layered. Each rune contained smaller runes within it, and those contained smaller ones still, recursive and infinite, a pattern that had no bottom and no top. Nova felt his soul move. That was the only way to describe it. Not his body, not his mind. Something deeper than both shifted, like tectonic plates realigning after a long stillness. And in that shifting, for the first time, he saw it. His soul. He had no reference for what a soul was supposed to look like. Whatever he'd expected, it wasn't this. It was enormous. Incomprehensibly so, not in the way of physical size but in the way of depth, like looking down into something with no floor. The structure was impossibly complex, layered with patterns and geometries that overlapped and interlocked in ways that suggested a kind of internal logic he couldn't begin to decode. And it radiated. Even in stillness, even dormant, it pulsed with a pure, ancient power that felt completely mismatched with the 17-year-old body containing it. He stared at it and thought with absolute clarity. No god has a soul like this. He couldn't prove that, but he felt it the way you feel the truth of something before you have the words for it. Then he noticed the gray. More than 99% of his soul was covered in it. A deep, layered gray that wasn't decay or damage. It was deliberate, a suppression, a seal so thorough and so carefully constructed that it had clearly been placed with intention, by something that understood exactly what it was containing. The remaining fraction, barely a sliver of the whole, was the part that shone, the part that was active, the part that was him as he currently existed. Nova looked at the gray and understood immediately that it was protecting him. If that seal lifted entirely, right now, with the consciousness and comprehension he currently possessed, he wouldn't survive it. Not because the power would destroy his body, but because his mind couldn't hold the laws and rules governing whatever he truly was. It would be like pouring an ocean into a paper cup and expecting the cup to remain a cup. His past selves were in there. He was certain of it. The memories, the experiences, the identities accumulated across however many lifetimes his soul had traveled through. All of it locked behind that gray, kept safely separate from the fragile consciousness of a 17-year-old boy on a planet 3 centuries into its cataclysm. I'll find a way, he thought. Gradually, carefully. The unlimited amplification runes completed their etching. The effect was nothing like the Emberwood flame. Where that had been a quiet warmth, this was a tide. A profound, pleasant wave of sensation that moved through his entire soul simultaneously, like something long compressed finally being given room to breathe. He felt himself evolve just slightly, just at the edges. Like a door had been opened 1 inch in a wall that had been sealed for a very long time. Faded. He exhaled. Unlimited amplification successfully etched. Origin talent awakening complete. Initiating comprehensive attribute scan. Matching optimal profession options. Match complete. 6 luminous panels materialized in a semicircle around him, each carrying distinct information. Shadow Reaper, common. A lethal specialist in covert elimination. Exceptional single-target burst damage with emphasis on stealth mechanics. Crimson Berserker, rare. a warrior who channels life force into devastating offensive power. Bloodsteel and blood detonation techniques for sustained combat dominance. Radiant Sovereign, Epic, an elemental caster specialized in light-based techniques, combines offensive capabilities with supportive healing. Excels in area bombardment and precision strikes. Essence Flowmaster, Legendary, a martial artist who has comprehended the fundamental principles of vital energy manipulation. All techniques bypass conventional defenses. Runic Hierophant, Legendary, one who commands the primal power contained within language itself, speaks and reality obeys. Martial Cultivation God, Mythical. Nova's eyes moved across each panel slowly. 5 out of 6 were rare or above. 2 were legendary. And the last one, the one with no description, no listed abilities, nothing but question marks, carried a classification he had never once heard mentioned in 3 years of academy study. Mythical tier. He'd heard of legendary tier professionals. There were perhaps a handful in the entire Valdres Federation, each one a living landmark, the kind of person cities built defensive strategies around. Mythical wasn't a category that existed in any textbook he'd read. It wasn't a tier students were told to aspire to. It was simply absent from the curriculum, the way things too rare to be useful are quietly omitted. He stared at the question marks for a long time. The trial for something like that has to be unreasonable, he thought. Nightmare difficulty at minimum. Maybe something that simply shouldn't be passable at my current level. Failing the trial meant civilian status. No profession. In a world where abyssal spawn could level cities, that was a quiet death sentence stretched across years. Please finalize your selection. Countdown initiated. 30, 29. His father's voice surfaced from memory, worn and quiet and certain. When faced with impossible odds, the Stern family doesn't retreat. We charge forward. Nova selected the panel. Selection confirmed. Martial Cultivation God, Mythical. Trial challenge required for job awakening. Available difficulty tiers. Normal, hard, nightmare. Nightmare, he said. Selection confirmed. Initiating spatial transfer to trial arena. The trial spire was a vast circular chamber built from luminous white stone. Smooth walls, high ceiling, no exits. Clean and featureless in the way of places designed for only one purpose. Welcome to the trial spire, floor 1 of 10. Complete all 10 floors to achieve job awakening. Nightmare difficulty. Duplicates will manifest at Tier 1 combat capability. Defeat all duplicates within 60 seconds or face trial failure. Nova read that last line twice. Tier 1. A duplicate of himself operating at Tier 1 capability, the level of a trained warrior capable of leveling a house with a single strike. His current stats were those of an unawakened civilian who trained hard. The gap between those two things was not a gap. It was a cliff. The duplicate materialized across from him. Same face, same build, same stance. But the moment its eyes focused, the air around it changed. A faint pressure radiating from its frame. The quiet authority of a body that had crossed the threshold into true warrior territory. It looked at him the way a person looks at something they intend to remove from their path. Then it moved. The speed was shocking. Nova's trained reflexes caught the first punch by pure muscle memory. He got his guard up, absorbed the impact, and the force drove him backward 3 full steps, his arms ringing with the collision. Tier 1 strike. Even partially blocked, it hit like a car. The duplicate followed immediately. A low kick to destabilize, a rising elbow to the guard, a grab attempt at his collar. Nova moved on instinct, deflect, pivot, create space. But the duplicate matched every adjustment with mechanical precision. It knew his footwork because it was his footwork. It anticipated his counters because they were its counters. 20 seconds gone. Nova hadn't landed a single clean hit. I can't outfight this. Not conventionally. Not at this level. 30 seconds. The duplicate caught him with a straight punch that slipped his guard and snapped his head back. He tasted blood. 40 seconds. Now. He activated unlimited amplification mid-pivot, creating half a second of distance with a backward step. Ding! Primordial origin talent. Unlimited amplification. Activated. Random effect determination in progress. Result: Comprehension amplified by 100,000x. Evolution triggered. Comprehension has evolved into Divine Tier Talent. Absolute Insight. Soul Talent etching initiated. The runes came fast this time, sharp, radiant, branching structures that spread across his soul like a constellation being drawn in real time. They were nothing like the Emberwood Flame's simple warmth or even Unlimited Amplification's vast recursive patterns. These were alive with motion, constantly updating, constantly processing, like a machine that had just been switched on and was already running at full capacity. As they etched, Nova felt the gray. 1% of it cleared. It happened in an instant. A small section of the vast suppressed territory simply dissolved, and what poured through the gap was not controlled or gentle. Fragmented memories arrived like shards of broken glass. Images without context, faces without names, landscapes from worlds he had no framework to place. Intents crashed in behind them, incomplete and urgent. Fragments of laws he couldn't yet read. Combat instincts from bodies he'd never inhabited in this life. Skills attached to no system he recognized. He clamped down on all of it with everything he had. Later, he told himself with complete finality, and sealed the flood behind an internal wall. The etching completed. Absolute Insight successfully etched. Divine Tier. Nova Stern now possesses 3 origin talents. Chapter 4. Nightmare Trial. Birth of a God 2, then Absolute Insight activated. And Nova's mind became something else entirely. It didn't feel like acceleration. It felt like the removal of a limitation he hadn't known existed. Like spending his entire life looking through frosted glass and suddenly having it wiped clean. Every book he had ever read came back. Not approximately, not in summary, every page, every diagram, every half-remembered theory he'd glanced at once and forgotten. His 3 years of academy textbooks, the cultivation manuals, the physics and mathematics courses from his previous life, the biology notes he'd crammed the week before an exam and never thought about again. His mind didn't just recall them. It started working. Mathematics resolved into geometric attack patterns. The optimal angle to maximize penetrating force against a moving target, strike trajectories that minimized the defender's reaction window, the precise geometry of a flanking approach that created no readable telegraph. Physics became something tactile, force application, momentum transfer, the specific vibration frequency that caused structural resonance in bone and tissue. Biology handed him his own body like a technical manual, which muscle groups to pretension before impact, how to recruit fast-twitch fibers with conscious intent, how to regulate blood flow to clear lactic acid mid-combat. The vibrational force technique arrived first among the new constructions his mind assembled. The principle was simple once Absolute Insight framed it. Rapid oscillation of internal energy at a precise frequency, applied at the moment of contact. The vibration didn't add to the surface force of a strike. It bypassed it, propagating inward through whatever it touched and resonating destructively against internal structures. A wall could stop a sledgehammer. It had considerably more difficulty stopping a strike that turned its own molecular cohesion against itself. After that came the geometric step, a movement pattern derived from the mathematics of unpredictable angles, each footfall placed to create a new attack vector that the previous step hadn't telegraphed. Not speed, but geometry. Move where the attack isn't, arrive where the counter isn't. Then the pressure point collapse, biology applied directly, strikes targeted at the precise anatomical coordinates where force distribution was weakest, the spots where even a fraction of his current strength could create damage far exceeding what raw power alone would suggest. The duplicate had used 17 seconds of his remaining time closing the distance. Nova looked at it and saw everything. Every microtension in its stance. The slight forward lean that preceded its preferred straight punch. The way its weight distributed fractionally to the right before a kick. The timing gap between its offensive combinations. A window of 0.3 seconds where its guard collapsed inward after a right-handed strike. He stepped into its next attack instead of away from it. The straight punch came. Nova turned his head precisely 11 degrees. Absolute Insight had already calculated the margin, and felt the fist graze his ear rather than connect. In the same motion he drove his palm into the duplicate's elbow joint from below, applied the vibrational force technique at the point of contact, and felt the limb fail structurally from the inside out. The duplicate staggered. Nova was already moving through the geometric step sequence, arriving at its blind side before its recovery could complete. A pressure point collapse strike to the base of the neck. A vibrational force palm to the sternum. The duplicate came apart. Nova stood in the silence afterward, looking at his raised hand. The rainbow light in his eyes was still cycling slowly. Absolute insight running at idle, processing, cataloging, preparing. Was I really that weak before? He said quietly. Floor 1 cleared. Reward. Strength plus 10 floors 2 through 9 passed in a rhythm that grew more complex but never uncertain. Floor 2 brought 2 Tier 1 duplicates, coordinated, their emberwood flame active, fire-enhanced strikes coming from opposing angles. Nova mapped their synchronization pattern in 4 seconds and identified the 0.7-second window where their coordination required them to briefly occupy overlapping strike zones. He walked through that window and took them apart sequentially. Floor 3 introduced a Tier 1 duplicate alongside a Tier 2, a version of himself operating at warrior capability sufficient to level a small town with sustained effort. The Tier 2 duplicate speed was genuinely threatening, its strikes carrying a weight that made his bones ache through a solid block. Nova abandoned blocking entirely and moved to pure evasion, using geometric step to deny its ability to establish position while the vibrational force technique handled the Tier 1. For the Tier 2 he needed something new. Absolute insight found it in physics, specifically plasma generation through focused vibration. Friction at sufficient frequency and concentration generated heat. Heat at sufficient concentration ionized air. Ionized air conducted force in ways that bypassed physical armor entirely. He had no name for the technique when he used it the first time, a palm strike that arrived trailing a brief arc of superheated plasma, but it dropped the Tier 2 duplicate in a single hit. He named it afterwards. Plasma collapse. Floor 4 brought 3 Tier 1 duplicates and a Tier 2. Floor 5 added another Tier 2. Each floor pushed the combination higher, the coordination tighter, the raw power of the Tier 2 duplicates increasingly difficult to simply absorb. Nova stopped absorbing. He used their force, redirecting momentum, adding his own vector to theirs, turning their mass into a weapon against the others. Physics again. Objects in motion. By floor 7 he was moving through engagements with an efficiency that felt less like fighting and more like solving an equation he'd already worked out in his head. The techniques kept building, each floor producing a new constraint that forced absolute insight to reach deeper into his recalled knowledge and construct something new. A nerve disruption strike from biology. A resonance collapse from material science. A breath control method from his vague memory of a martial arts documentary he'd watched once at 15 that absolute insight had apparently filed away perfectly regardless. Floor 9 fell. He barely remembered dispatching the last duplicate. Floor 10. 10 Tier 2 duplicates materialized simultaneously. Nova stood in the center of the chamber and looked at all of them. 10 versions of himself, each capable of reducing a small city block to rubble in a sustained engagement, arranged in a formation that covered every exit angle and left no obvious approach vector. The timer started. He exhaled once. Absolute insight mapped the formation, calculated the collapse sequence, the order in which eliminating each duplicate would most effectively degrade the formation's remaining coordination, and handed him the complete answer in approximately 1 second. He moved. Geometric step through the first gap, a narrow corridor between 2 duplicates that existed for exactly the 0.4 seconds their movement patterns created it. Plasma collapse to the first duplicate's chest, vibrational force to the second spine in the same motion. The formation's left flank collapsed. The remaining 8 recalibrated. Nova was already inside their new formation before the recalibration completed. It was less a battle than a systematic dismantling. He moved through the 10 duplicates the way water moves through cracks, not forcing, finding. Each one fell to the technique most specifically suited to its position, its angle, its momentary vulnerability. The last duplicate swung a Tier 2 fist that would have taken his head off. He wasn't there when it arrived. He was behind it. Vibrational force. The duplicate came apart. Silence. Then the chamber detonated with light. Floor 10 cleared. Reward. All attributes doubled. Congratulations. Trial Spire fully completed. Nightmare difficulty job awakening achieved. Reward. Supreme Treasure Chest X1. Job awakening complete. Profession acquired. Martial Cultivation God. Mythical tier. Unique. Ding. Exclusive skill acquired. Limit break. Passive special essence. Ding. Exclusive skill acquired. Phantom step. Ding. Exclusive skill acquired. Celestial annihilation. Ding. Exclusive skill acquired. Infinite velocity. Nova stood in the fading light of the celebration effects, rainbow slowly dimming in his eyes, and let the silence settle. After a moment, he sat down on the floor of the chamber. He had things to think about. The gray soul. He turned it over carefully now that the urgency had passed. 1% had cleared when absolute insight etched itself, a small fraction of the vast suppressed territory, but the implication was significant. The etching of a new talent had physically reduced the seal, which meant the seal and the soul's capacity for talent were connected. He worked through the logic slowly. Talents were laws etched into the soul, fragments of universal principle given permanent residence in a person's deepest self. The act of receiving a new one, of expanding the soul's encoded knowledge of the universe's rules, had apparently been enough to dissolve a fraction of the gray. Not because the talent was powerful, but because the etching itself represented genuine growth in the soul's comprehension of reality. So the mechanism wasn't strength. It was understanding. He extended the theory. If etching a talent cleared gray area, then comprehending a law deeply enough to etch it into the soul directly, without the ceremony, through pure personal insight, would likely produce the same effect. The soul recognized genuine comprehension of universal principle regardless of how it arrived. Talents were simply a formalized version of something the soul could also receive organically. That gave him two paths: gather talents through awakening arrays and ceremonies, or sit with a law long enough that it became part of him on its own terms. Both paths pointed to the same destination: understand more, unlock more. And behind each unlocked percentage waited whatever he had been. Fragmented memories, broken intents, laws he'd carried across lifetimes without knowing. The flood he'd sealed off during the trial was still there, patient and pressurized, waiting for him to be ready. He wasn't ready yet, but he had a method now and a direction, and the kind of stubbornness that didn't know how to stop once it had found a thread worth pulling. Nova looked at his hand, the faint ember glow of emberwood flame somewhere beneath the skin. The deeper hum of unlimited amplification settled into his bones, the quiet, ever-present processing of absolute insight running behind his eyes like a second heartbeat. 3 talents. A mythical profession. A soul that shouldn't exist in a 17-year-old body. He allowed himself a small, unhurried smile. "Well," he said to the empty chamber, "that went better than expected." Chapter 5. Martial God. The celebration effects were still fading when the chamber changed again. This time it wasn't a transfer or a notification. Something else. A deep, structural shift that Nova felt in his bones before he understood what was happening. The air pressure in the trial spire dropped suddenly, like the moment before a storm, and then the job awakening began doing something that Academy lecture said rarely happened. Evolution. It started in his chest. A heat that had nothing to do with the emberwood flame ignited somewhere behind his sternum and spread outward through his body in slow, deliberate waves. His muscles locked. His spine straightened without his input. He tried to move and found that whatever was happening had quietly removed that option. Not painfully, but absolutely, the way deep water removes the option of walking. Then the restructuring began and pain became very much part of the conversation. His meridian pathways, the channels that governed how energy moved through a cultivator's body, were being rebuilt from the inside. Not expanded or cleared the way standard cultivation manuals described progression. Rebuilt. Torn apart at the structural level and reconstructed according to a blueprint that bore no resemblance to standard human anatomy. Nova felt each pathway dissolve and reform, a sensation somewhere between burning wire and the specific agony of a limb waking up from deep numbness, except happening simultaneously across every channel in his body at once. He didn't scream, but he infinitely came close. His blood changed next. He felt it moving differently, thicker with something new, carrying a charge it hadn't carried before. His bones densified. The muscle fiber throughout his body rewrote its own composition. Fast twitch and slow twitch restructuring into something the biology textbooks in his memory had no category for. He was being made into something that wasn't quite human anymore. Not monstrous, the process had a precision and intention to it that felt almost respectful. But definitively other. Then the true chi arrived. It wasn't added from outside. It was born, the exact moment his restructured spirit force and soul force made contact with his transformed blood and chi simultaneously, for things merging into one thing that was categorically different from any of its components. Like hydrogen and oxygen becoming water. The same elements, an entirely new substance. It moved through his rebuilt meridians like light through fiber, instant, frictionless, carrying a density of power that his old chi had never approached. Nova held it in his awareness and felt it respond, alive and precise, waiting. At the same moment, knowledge arrived. Not gradually, not as a flood he had to process. It simply appeared in his mind as though it had always been there, the way you know your own name. Everything about the martial god Physique. Its structural principles. Its maintenance requirements. Its relationship to true chi. The complete operational knowledge of all four exclusive skills. Not summaries and descriptions, but full mastery. Every step of every technique, every variable in every execution, every way true chi needed to move and at what intensity to produce each effect. He understood limit break not as a passive bonus but as a living process, true chi permanently circulating through specific restructured pathways, maintaining a constant amplification that his body now supported as a baseline state. It wasn't activated. Simply was. Phantom Step resolved in his mind as a true chi compression technique, concentrating a percent of his total true chi into a single synchronized burst through his offensive pathways and into his weapon simultaneously, creating a strike that moved faster than conventional defensive systems could track and carried enough penetrating force to push through barriers that worked by reading and countering incoming energy. The synchronization between his true chi and weapon had to be total. Any gap in that synchronization and the technique degraded. Full mastery meant the gap was zero. Celestial annihilation was the dangerous one. It demanded that he push true chi into a state of violent acceleration, deliberately destabilizing the circulation to achieve speeds and densities that normal operation never touched. At that state, his defensive capability increased 1,000-fold as hardened true chi formed over every vital point. His attack speed multiplied 5-fold, and the sheer force of the circulation purged anything external that tried to take hold of his body or mind. The cost was stamina 1% per second. The technique had no cooldown because it didn't need one. Used correctly, nothing lasted long enough to matter. Infinite velocity was elegant by comparison. True chi compressed entirely into the leg pathways and released in a single directional burst. Not running, not leaping, but a genuine spatial displacement that happened too quickly for control-type techniques to interrupt because the true chi was completely isolated during execution. 300 meters current range. Cooldown reset on kill. Nova held all of it in his mind simultaneously and found that it fit. Not comfortably, the way familiar things fit. The way a key fits a lock it was made for. The evolution finished. He exhaled and the breath came out different. Steadier, carrying a faint resonance that the air around him seemed to briefly respond to before settling. He rolled his shoulders. The rebuilt body moved with a precision that his old one had always approximated but never quite achieved. He pulled up his panel. Status, character. Nova Stern, race. Human, martial god Physique. Age, 17. Level. LV0, unranked. Profession. Martial cultivation god. Mythical tier. Unique. Talents. Unlimited amplification. Primordial origin. Absolute insight. Divine tier. Emberwood flame. E-rank. Physical strength. 630. Strength. 610. Speed. 620. Spirit. 670. Luck. 14. Intense. None. Laws. None. Passive special essence. Limit break. All attributes X10 permanent. Active skills. Phantom Step, Celestial Annihilation, Infinite Velocity. Practice methods. Basic martial arts. Perfect mastery. Vibrational force technique. Basic breathing method. Basic body forging method. Equipment. None. Free attribute points. 0. Battle power. 67,000. Peak attribute multiplied by 100, i.e. 670 times 100 is equal to 67,000. Evaluation. A monster wearing human skin. Nova, read the battle power line twice. 67,000. Tier 1 warriors ranged from 1,000 to 10,000 battle power. Tier 2 topped out at 50,000. He was sitting at 67,000 before reaching level 1, before earning a single point of progression through EXP cultivation, before opening the treasure chest sitting unclaimed in the corner of his awareness. That put him in Tier 3 territory. At level 0, unranked. He thought about Aldrich Wintercrown, the Academy's top student, already on the verge of Tier 1 before today's ceremony. From a family that had produced Tier 7 warriors across 3 generations. Whatever Aldrich had awakened today, his battle power was almost certainly sitting somewhere in the low thousands at best. Nova's battle power was 67 times higher than the maximum a Tier 1 warrior could achieve. He closed the panel. Right? He said quietly to the empty chamber. Deep breaths. He took them. They helped marginally. The treasure chest could wait. He filed it away alongside the suppressed memories from the gray soul clearance, the fragmented intents, the flood of past life material he still hadn't sorted through. His mental backlog was developing a backlog. Spatial transfer initiating in 10 seconds, returning to original coordinates. Of course. Nova glanced at the chest one last time. Later then, divine radiance gathered around him and the trial spire dissolved. He arrived in noise. The athletic grounds had transformed from a field of nervous silence into something closer to a battlefield of emotions. Students materialized in bursts of light across the formation's surface, each arrival accompanied by an immediate outpouring of whatever the trial had done to them. Yes, Battle Mage. I got Battle Mage. A boy punched the air hard enough that the students near him flinched. C-rank talent. Okay, I can work with C-rank. A girl pressed both hands to her chest, exhaling with the specific relief of someone who'd prepared for worse. Don't ask me how mine went. Her friend was already sitting on the ground with his knees pulled up. What happened? Chef. I awakened as a chef. A brief silence. That's not. In a world where abyssal spawn are trying to eat humanity, I am a chef. Nearby, the boy who had announced his guaranteed S-rank talent with absolute conviction stood at a 45-degree angle, staring at the sky. A single tear tracked down his cheek with theatrical slowness. Dancer, he said to no one. My origin talent is called Rooster's Pride. He paused. Do they expect me to literally sing, dance, and rap my way through combat? Someone patted his shoulder. There were no words adequate to the situation. Seraphine Vex had collected a crowd without appearing to try. She stood near the center of the field, her twin buns slightly disheveled from whatever the trial had put her through, accepting congratulations with the composed modesty of someone who'd expected good results and received them. Shadow Mage, rare tier. A rank talent. The kind of awakening that would put her name in front of every top-tier combat university's admissions committee before the week was out. You're definitely getting into a first-tier university with those qualifications. Shadow Mage is incredible. When you make it big, remember us. Sarah, you're the pride of the whole class, honestly. Seraphine smiled politely at each one, said the appropriate things, and kept scanning the crowd. Cade Fenrir was doing circles. Not metaphorical circles, literal ones, turning in place every few seconds to sweep a different section of the field, his expression cycling between anxious and more anxious. Instructor Mordain approached him with her clipboard. Cade, report. C-rank talent, beast empathy. Monster veterinarian profession. He said it without breaking his visual search of the crowd. I know, it suits me. Please tell me later, where is Valor? Everyone's back except him. Students return at different intervals depending on trial complexity and he's been gone longer than anyone else, including the elite class. Cade's jaw tightened. That's not normal. Mordain had no immediate answer for that. The elite class arrival cut through every other conversation on the field. Aldrich Wintercrown materialized from a column of light that seemed slightly brighter than everyone else's. Whether that was real or the crowd's collective imagination was difficult to determine. He stood tall, aristocratic features arranged in the satisfied expression of a man who'd received exactly what he'd expected from the universe. Headmaster Gareth moved toward him immediately, the space between them closing with the unhurried certainty of someone accustomed to having crowds part before them. Aldrich. Origin talent. Aldrich raised one hand. Wind gathered around his palm instantly, building from nothing into a miniature cyclone that sent nearby students' hair whipping sideways. He let it spin for a moment with the timing of someone who understood presentation. S-rank. Tempest incarnate. He lowered his hand, the cyclone dissolving. Job awakened as Epic Tier Storm Sovereign. The field erupted. S-rank. Epic Tier Profession. That's insane. First S-rank of the year. He really is the Academy's #1. Several female students in the crowd had pressed their hands to their hearts. A few instructors exchanged looks that mixed professional approval with personal awe. Even Headmaster Gareth's weathered face broke into a broad, booming laugh that carried across the entire field without effort. Outstanding Wintercrown. Your family will be proud. The remaining elite class stars emerged in quick succession: Cassius Shadowbane, Rowan Ashford, Lyrissa Shenvale, Calith Frostborn. Each arrival adding another wave to the crowd's reactions. Cassius had awakened S-rank Iron Domination and Job awakened as Epic Tier Blade Saint. The crowd roared. Rowan Ashford's S-rank Forest Dragon's Blessing and Rare Tier Verdant Elementalist drew another surge of noise.